In 2010, in March, I went to Capel Middle School East. I was getting ready to present my English project to the entire class. I walked up to the board, and as soon as I hit the clicker, the phone rang. I wondered who this lucky person might be leaving school so early, but little did I know, that person was me. Then my teacher said, "Ramya, pack up your stuff, you need to go to the front office, your mom's waiting for you." I felt a sigh of relief swift past me. But then the questions raised, why me and why now? As soon as I went to the front office, my mom held my hand and made me run with her to the car. I asked what happened, but she didn't even answer any of my questions. The next thing I knew, we were at the airport, and then on the airplane, and then in India, and then a hospital. I had never been so confused in my life. Hello all, my name is Ramya Research, and I am a senior at Frisco High School. This is my first year to be a part of ISM, and the topic I chose to research this year is cardiothoracic surgery. The scenario I had just mentioned earlier was what I went through to find out that my grandfather had just had a heart attack and was at the ICU after surgery. A few weeks later, my grandfather was fine and he got discharged. However, this incident astonished me. I was convinced that being a surgeon was worth it if it could save a life like my grandfather's life was saved. As a kid, I never really liked going to the doctor's office. I never even understood why I went there. It was always so boring, and I hated the idea of getting vaccine shots. The doctor's job always looked so boring to me. All they would do is come inside, sit down, talk for like a few minutes and leave. Or at least that's what I thought when I was a kid. Honestly, the one and only reason I ever even went to the doctor's office was to get a sticker and a lollipop. But I then decided that if I ever did anything for a living, it had to be something which made my heart flutter. It had to be something which involved moving and around and not just diagnosing patients, even though that is very much an important job or part of being a doctor. Later, I found out about surgery. It caught my attention, and the more I understood the concept of it, the more I wanted to become one. After around 30 phone calls and 20 emails sent to professionals, I started off my interview sessions with Dr. Gautam Reddy. Dr. Gautam Reddy is an interventional cardiologist at Heart Place at Plano. I started off talking to Dr. Gautam Reddy about college and the difference between college in America and college in India, which is where Dr. Gautam Reddy studied medicine. We went off into a deep conversation, and I gained a lot of valuable information about how it doesn't matter where you study, but rather what knowledge is being gained through the education. During the interview, an interesting fact I found out was that Dr. Reddy would often get patients who would come in and act as if they're sick in order to get drugs. My second interview was conducted with Dr. Lynn Huffman, who works at UT Southwestern as a cardiothoracic surgeon. With Dr. Lynn Huffman, we discussed about how research is often conducted in labs. Dr. Lynn Huffman told me about how experiments would be conducted and how these experiments would be regarding testing specific medicines and drugs, and its results in the experimental groups, which primarily consisted of animals such as rats. Another interesting thing that I found through this interview was about the resumes. Generally, resumes are around 1 page to 2 pages, or at least that's what I thought. But when I saw Dr. Lynn Huffman's resume, I was so surprised. It was 15 pages long, and half of it was just medical journals, and I was very interested about that. Later, another thing I found out about being a doctor was the busy schedules. Dr. Lynn Huffman told me about how his day would start off at 5 a.m. with rounds, going through each and every patient, and after that, paperwork, and then a surgical case, and then rounds again. But then, it's a lot of hard work, but it's all worth it at the end. My third interview was conducted with Dr. Scott Resnick, who works at UT Southwestern as a cardiothoracic surgeon. However, Dr. Scott Resnick mainly focuses on the esophagus and lungs rather than just the heart. Dr. Scott Resnick's conversation with me started off talking about patients. I remember how he told me about how he encountered 2 patients in one day who were 100 years apart. One was a 6-year-old, and the other was 106-year-old. And he was surprisingly quite healthy for a 106-year-old. Another patient he encountered was a patient who had arthritis and suffered from esophageal perforation. Esophageal perforation is when there's a hole in the esophagus. This is bad as the unsterilized matter could spread to other organs. To fix this problem, he and his team connected the esophagus to the side of the neck. This was only a temporary fix. However, later, that temporary fix became a permanent fix. Overall, through this interview, I really liked an analogy which Dr. Scott Resnick mentioned about how working at a hospital is like going to high school. The jocks are like the orthopedic surgeons, and the nerds are like the cardiothoracic surgeons, and so on. The groups don't get along the best way, but they learn to live and work with each other. Life in a way is like that too. You will not always get along with everyone, but eventually you will learn to get along. My fourth interview was with Dr. Carlos Bagley, who also works at UT Southwestern as a neurosurgeon. Dr. Carlos Bagley primarily works on tumors on the spinal cord rather than the brain. Through this interview, I learned the importance of managing time and life well. Dr. Carlos Bagley taught me how if life is not managed well, especially with family, it could get difficult. It could get pretty difficult in the medical field, as many hours are dedicated just for work. My fifth interview was conducted with Dr. Kelly Hutchison. Dr. Kelly Hutchison works at the Heart Hospital Baylor at Plano, and she is a cardiothoracic surgeon. Through this interview, I learned the difference between a private practice and an academic practice. Private practices don't really involve teaching, but rather just researching and conducting surgeries, while academic practices involve teaching residents and interns while researching and conducting surgeries as well. I realized through this interview that communicating is very important, as that's what helps both the patients and the workplace. My sixth interview was conducted with Dr. Hunt Badger, who also works at UT Southwestern as a neurosurgeon. Dr. Hunt Badger primarily works on the brain rather than just the spinal cord. I met Dr. Hunt Badger as soon as he came out of surgery. The patient he was working on had a tumor right at his head, on the right side of his head, and that was affecting the patient's speech. After the surgery, Dr. Hunt Badger came up to me and told me about how this patient might not even be able to talk later in his life because of the surgery and because of the condition, because of the tumor. If he does happen to be able to talk, it would take him a couple of years. Overall, I realized the importance of relationships with patients. I realized it's very important for the doctors to have a good relationship with not only the patients, but also the patient's family. My seventh interview was conducted with Dr. Pietro Bayona. Dr. Pietro Bayona is a cardiothoracic surgeon at UT Southwestern, and he primarily conducts surgeries on the heart. In this interview, I learned the difference between interventional cardiology and cardiothoracic surgery. As medical technology has grown throughout the years, the cardiac field or cardiothoracic surgical field has split into many sections. Interventional cardiology is a type of medicine where open heart surgery is not required to complete a certain procedure. Cardiothoracic surgery, on the other hand, involves open heart surgery. However, because of medical improvements and technological improvements, interventional cardiology is the route which many people go into, as the same results are given with different ways. My eighth interview was conducted with Dr. Matthias Peltz at UT Southwestern, and he is a cardiothoracic surgeon. I learned the different types of ICUs which exist under the UT Southwestern section, and also that doctors have a lot of paperwork. It's not an easy job, and they're constantly given paperwork. They have to deal with post-op notes and pre-op notes, and it's a lot of work. But in the end, all this work pays off if the patient is doing well. Next is my research assessment. through my research assessments and my interview assessments, I realized that there's a trend going on. I always focused on post-operative complications in patients. So with that, I wanted to create my original work, which is related to this. So I wanted to create an app or a certain type of database where patients and doctors can both access and know the complications that come with a certain patient's surgery. So if a certain patient were to go through a heart transplant, based off of that patient's diagnosis or like that patient's current problems, such as like if they have diabetes or such, would a heart transplant help them or not help them? Would there be any complications in this specific surgery? And I wanted this database to have an easier way to record all this information so that even patients' families could understand this information well. Overall, this brings me to say, if you never try, you'll never know. It's better to try and then fail rather than never try, because you could eventually regret it later. No matter what you do, whether you think it will be beneficial later in life or not, it is important to try and go for that first instinct, because a life with no regrets is the way I want to live. Thank you.